Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kelsey De Renaldis. I'm the Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. I'm delighted to be joined by Frank Jannuzi, President and CEO of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. I would also like to welcome Dr. Chikako Kawakatsu Ueki, Professor at the Graduate School of the Asia Pacific Studies at Waseda University, who will serve as our moderator. We are honored to be partnering with the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation to co-host today's program. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that today's event is on the record. There will be English and Japanese simultaneous interpretation, plus Japanese Sign Language interpretation. Following the opening remarks and presentation by Mr. Jannuzi, we will open the session for questions and answers. We invite you to submit your questions throughout the session in the Q&A box. You can submit questions anonymously as well. Additionally, during today's program, we will be conducting audience polling. We encourage you to participate. It is completely anonymous. So now, I would like to invite you to engage with us all in some audience polling questions. This helps us to understand who is in the audience with us today and to get your thoughts on the topic. The polling question should pop up on your screen now. Again, your answers are anonymous, so we encourage you to participate, and we will give you a few moments to answer. And there are two questions. The first question is, what is the importance of the US alliance under the Biden administration? Is it on the rise, decline, or will it remain unchanged? And what issues do you want the Biden administration to focus on in its Asia policy? China, North Korea, Japan and Republic of Korea relations, stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific, climate change. So thank you all for taking a moment to answer. Provide one more moment. Okay, let me share the results. Great. So it looks like many of you believe that the importance of the US-Japan alliance under the Biden administration is on the rise. And many issues that are of importance to you, China, stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific, each of them here, it looks like as well, we will be speaking about today. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer our polling questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Kawakatsu Ueki, who will begin our program and introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Kawakatsu Ueki is a professor at the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies at Waseda University, where she specializes in international relations and security in East Asia, as well as US-Japan-China relations. She is an operating advisor to the US-Japan Research Institute and has served as a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Security and Defense Capabilities. Dr. Kawakatsu Ueki received her PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So, Kawakatsu Ueki sensei, dozo.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm Kawakatsu Ueki from Waseda University. I'm delighted to be here in this webinar with you. I will be serving as a moderator today. Now I'd like to introduce the keynote speaker, Mr. Frank Jannuzi. With the inauguration of the Biden administration, it's a great opportunity to hear from Mr. Jannuzi. Since April 2014, Mr. Jannuzi has been serving as the president and chief executive officer of Mansfield Foundation, and he previously served as deputy executive director at Amnesty International USA. And from 1997 to 2012, for quite a long time, he was policy director, East Asian and Pacific Affairs for the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When I first met Frank Sang was 1998, I believe. Regarding the Japan-US relations, I asked many people to whom I should ask questions, and then many people recommended Mr. Jannuzi, and I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Jannuzi, so I'm looking forward to the conversation with him today. And one of the things I'm looking forward to today is that he worked with the committee chairman, Joseph Biden, and John Kerry, who is now the advisor on climate change. Mr. Jannuzi worked with him for a long time, so he knows the philosophy and personality of Mr. Biden. So I'd like to ask questions to Jannuzi on that as well. And he is an expert on Japan. And he also worked for the Institute of International Policy Studies in Tokyo as well. And I hope the audience will also visit the website later. So Mr. Jannuzi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ueki Sensei. I appreciate the warm introduction, and thank you to U.S. Embassy Tokyo, all of my former colleagues at the Department of State, friends at the Mansfield Foundation, and distinguished guests joining this program this morning in Tokyo. It's a great pleasure to appear in front of you and have a chance to speak about a topic that I have spent most of my life on, the U.S. Place in Asia, the reliance of the United States upon our alliances in Asia, and also to try to give you some insights into what I expect the Biden administration will have as its top priorities over the next 4 years. Of course, I'm speaking personally. I cannot speak for the Biden administration, but only offer impressions as a person who has worked closely with then Senator Biden during his time in the Senate, and anticipate some of the issues that are certain to confront the administration over the next 4 years. My theme this morning is one of continuity and change. Continuity because there are issues that the United States must confront in Asia that transcend politics and transcend administrations. And so one can expect that there will be points of continuity between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, especially on two key challenges for the United States. The first being one that the audience well recognizes, the rise of China and the challenges that China poses to the liberal democratic order that has sustained peace and stability across the Indo-Pacific region in the post-war years. And the second challenge, one that has been vexing and difficult for 70 years, is the challenge posed by a divided Korean peninsula and a North Korean state that is pursuing nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them contrary to the international law and the will of the international community. These two challenges are enduring challenges that the Biden administration inherits from all previous administrations, including Trump. But there will also be important differences between Biden and Trump, perhaps no more profound than in their style of working, but also in some of the issue sets on which they will spend their energy. And there, especially climate change will be a topic that we can discuss this morning. But I want to speak to the personal side first, because I think it's really important to understand Joseph R. Biden as a human being to really have an accurate grip on what we might expect of his foreign policy with respect to Japan and the East Asian region. And it is a personal history shaped by tragedy, the loss of his wife and daughter in a car accident in the weeks preceding his swearing in as a member of the United States Senate, and also by renewal and hope, a life that has constantly found new hope and new optimism in the future. It was in that tragedy that Joe Biden formed a lasting friendship with Mike Mansfield. And as the president of the Mansfield Foundation, I have to highlight the very special relationship that developed between Senator Mike Mansfield and the young 30-year-old Joe Biden in the US Senate. Biden was going to quit the Senate after the car accident that injured his two sons and killed his wife and daughter. And it was Mike Mansfield who reached out to Biden and said, no, Joe, you cannot quit. The Senate will be your family now. And Biden stayed in the Senate, and Mike Mansfield met with him every week in his first term in office. Biden didn't realize how special that was. He thought perhaps Mike Mansfield was meeting with all of the senators, but it was just Joe, because he wanted Joe Biden to be successful as a senator. And he secured for Joe Biden a seat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as a freshman senator, which at that time in the 1970s was very unusual. Normally, only very senior senators were able to secure a seat on that committee. So this special relationship between Biden and Mansfield taught the young senator two things that he has taken with him into the Oval Office. The first is the importance of alliances in the conduct of foreign policy. Mike Mansfield, who went on to become ambassador to Japan after his distinguished service in the Senate, taught Joe Biden that the most important bilateral relationship in the world for the United States was the US-Japan relationship, and that relationship was central to everything that the United States would ever hope to accomplish in the Asia-Pacific region. Biden internalized this lesson, and although his specialty as a senator was on NATO and European security, he always appreciated the special role of Japan to the United States' place as a Pacific power. The second lesson is maybe a little bit more important even than the first in these days of political division in the United States. And that second lesson was the importance of reaching across the aisle and working with Republican members to find common ground, common interests, and solve problems. You saw this in Joe Biden's campaign to be president. You're going to see it in his presidency, a relentless appeal for unity and for common purpose and finding common ground with Republicans across the aisle. These two lessons were lessons that Mike Mansfield learned in his Senate career and that he imparted to the young Joe Biden. And I think that they are going to be very important as Biden fashions his foreign policy going forward. So how should we expect President Biden to approach the challenges that we face in Asia? It's going to begin with alliances and strengthening the fabric of community between the United States and its key partners in the Asia Pacific, Japan being number one, but also South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, Thailand, and new partners as well across the Indo-Pacific region with whom the United States can find common ground and common interest. So it's going to begin with alliances. And this will be a great contrast, I think, to Donald Trump. President Trump was famously skeptical about alliance relationships. He felt often that those alliance relationships were unequal and that the United States was somehow getting the short end of the deal. I think that as president, Joe Biden appreciates all that our allies bring to the table in defense of common values and interests around the world. As Prime Minister Abe said when he spoke on the floor of the US Congress, ours is an alliance of hope. And it's an alliance that transcends the narrow security issues that we face, territorial disputes in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, or illegal fishing and encroachments on territory. But it's really an alliance that goes more broadly to defending the liberal democratic order, rule of law, international norms on human rights and good governance, and working not just in the Indo-Pacific region, but really globally to advance those norms. Now, Biden expects, I think, that these alliance relationships will be mutually beneficial. So from a commitment to alliances, you also will have high expectations for what the two nations are going to try to accomplish together. I think we saw this already in the very first Biden-Suga call that happened just yesterday. I was struck by the fact that the two leaders agreed to call themselves Yoshi and Joe. And if you'll allow me, I have to tell you just how special it is for Joseph Biden to sort of allow someone to call him by his first name. It's something that he only does with his peers and with his close friends. I worked for Senator Biden for 12 years in the Senate. And for 12 years, even while traveling with him internationally, I always would refer to him as Senator Biden, Chairman Biden, or Senator, or Sir, never Joe. And this was not because he was stuffy or arrogant, because he is not. He's a very down-to-earth person. But Senator Biden was what I call an old school senator. It meant that he believed in the certain decorum, the certain rules of manners, and that senators were referred to as senator, not by their first name. So I think it's very special that he has established this first name basis with the Prime Minister of Japan. And it speaks to the style of diplomacy that President Biden is capable of in dealing with world leaders. He gets to know them as people, and he uses those personal relationships to solve problems. This is also something that he definitely learned in part from Mike Mansfield. Now, Biden has spoken to the challenges that we're going to face in the Asia Pacific, and no challenge is going to be greater than that of managing a rising China. And I want to speak to it for a moment because I know it's very much on the minds of people in Tokyo. I first went to China in 1984 as a foreign student at Beijing Foreign Languages Institute. And so I've witnessed firsthand the transformation of China from the time of the Cultural Revolution to becoming a modern, globally integrated, powerful nation. And Joe Biden's career also spans this same incredible transformation of China, from cultural revolution and poverty to a major actor on the global stage and the #2 economy in the world. Biden has always been, at heart, hopeful about the growth of China because he has seen in that growth the possibility of China becoming a constructive contributor to the global community. And indeed, we should not overlook the wonderful accomplishments of the Chinese government, not only in helping to spur development at home, but also becoming an engine for global economic growth, as well as assuming responsibilities in the international community, including support for UN peacekeeping. But at the same time that China has grown into this role as a global power, it also has stubbornly resisted accommodating all of the rules and norms of the international community, whether those are in the WTO with respect to trade and respect for intellectual property, or on human rights with respect to universally recognized human rights that should be afforded to all peoples and are the inherent right of all peoples, or even in security, where again, China has at times thrown its weight around and behaved in ways contrary to the international norms. How do we manage this challenge? I took Senator Biden to China in 2001, and I got a glimpse for what I think we can expect. He met with China's senior leaders, and at each meeting, whether it was with the president of China or the defense minister or the foreign minister or the premier, at each meeting, he began with security. The US and China have to work together to promote global security, and the United States will not tolerate Chinese behavior that directly threatens our security or the security of our allies. The next topic of discussion was always trade and international economics. And here, Senator Biden expressed his hope that China would become a constructive partner in the global economic system, and that China would, over time, integrate itself fully into the global economy and abide by the WTO trade rules. And the third topic that he raised in each meeting was human rights and rule of law, whether it was a discussion about Tibet and the human rights of the Tibetan people inside China, or whether it was a discussion of freedom of speech and freedom of information. Senator Biden did not shy away from explaining where he felt China's conduct fell short of international norms. These three issues, I expect, will be very much on the agenda of US-China relations moving forward. But in that trip to China, Biden also learned something else. And it was a lesson that I think he learned speaking with a student at Fudan University in Shanghai. Biden asked the students in a public meeting, what did they think about the students of Tiananmen Square? Were the students of Tiananmen Square who protested against the Chinese government and were brutally killed, were they heroes or were they traitors to the People's Republic of China? It was a very dramatic moment during his visit to China. And the answer from one of the students is something that I will never forget and which I believe President Biden will never forget. That student said, Senator, those students were heroes of the People's Republic of China, but they were also very naive and they had not studied physics. Now, I was confused. I was listening to the student, but I wasn't sure where he was going. So he continued. He said, Senator, China is a very large object in motion. The students of Tiananmen Square stood up to try to change China's direction, and they were crushed. It was a dramatic moment, and I worried that maybe that student was going to find himself in trouble. But then he saved himself, and he also taught Senator Biden a lesson about US-China relations. He said, Senator, change will come to China, but it will be we, the students of Isaac Newton, who are the architects of that change, and not anyone in Washington, D.C. I think that as president, Joseph Biden will understand that America can help to shape China's decision-making. And our ability to do that will be enhanced if we do it with partners like Japan. But the United States and Japan cannot dictate China's future. That decision will rest with the Chinese people. And I think that this is where you will see, again, a big difference between Trump and his America First agenda, and President Biden, who will seek to reinforce the norms of the international community by working in concert with like-minded countries, and will keep the door open and reach out to China in the hopes that they will be what Bob Zellick called a responsible stakeholder in the international system. That should be our goal, not one of containment or an adversarial relationship with China. Now, I expect that this will be his approach, one that seeks to find common ground with China in the same way that he would find common ground with Republicans across the aisle. We need to work with China on climate change, and we need to work with China to solve the thorny problems of the Korean Peninsula. If solving North Korea was easy, we would have done it 70 years ago. Biden has traveled to Korea many times. He knows how difficult this challenge is, and he discussed it with Prime Minister Suga just yesterday. I think what you can expect from President Biden on the Korean Peninsula is that there's an awareness that the only path to solving peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula lies through diplomacy. But that diplomacy has to be rooted in reality, not fantasy. North Korea will not easily abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And we're going to have to work in close concert with our allies, Japan and South Korea, to solve the nuclear puzzle on the Korean Peninsula. It's my personal hope, as someone who used to work at Amnesty International and has an abiding interest in the human rights of the people around the world, that in pursuing peace and denuclearization, the United States will not forget about the human dimension of this problem. It's about more than just nuclear missiles. It's about people, whether they be the North Korean people suffering under a system that doesn't protect their rights, or the South Korean people living under threat of a potential nuclear attack from the North, or the Japanese people who have endured missiles flying over Hokkaido, or abduction of Japanese citizens by the North Korean government. I'm roughly the same age as Megumi Yokota, and I met with her parents and brother many times in Washington and in Japan. And there must at some point come a resolution of the questions that linger about Japanese citizens who were abducted by North Korea. And this is also part of the human dimension to the North Korean challenge that needs to be addressed. And I'm very glad that President Biden pledged to Prime Minister Suga that this would also be part of the agenda when working on the North Korean challenge. Let me close by offering up just a couple of thoughts, personal thoughts about Joseph Biden and his approach to foreign affairs. He likes to surround himself with experts. He likes to read. He likes to study his briefs and prepare for meetings. In this, his style is very different than Trump, who I believe, as president, relied a lot on his instincts. Biden trusts his judgment, but he wants to be prepared for meetings. He wants to be prepared to execute his plans. Biden used to tell me that having a strategy was not real unless it was backed by resources. And he also used to tell me often that the worst thing that I could do as an advisor would be to pretend to know something that I don't know. In fact, when he interviewed me for my job, he asked me only one question. He said, "What are the 3 most important words that you will ever say to me?" I had not prepared for that question. So I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Exactly." He said, "Don't you ever bullshit me. Because if you do, then I'm going to go on television and I'm going to share that with the audience. And I'm going to look silly and you're going to be out of a job." So this is a guy who is rooted in the facts and the truth and who wants good information about the world around him. It's a president who will listen to peers and also to senior advisors. And it's a president who will prepare carefully for the challenge of managing a rising China, bringing peace and security to the Korean Peninsula, and working with the most important bilateral relationship in the world, bar none, the US-Japan alliance, to try to advance our common interests in the Asia-Pacific region and around the world. And that's why I'm optimistic that what was reflected in the poll will be true, that the US-Japan relationship will be rising in its importance as we work together to address the challenges of climate change, as we work to try to reinforce international norms with respect to China, and as we work together with South Korea to try to bring peace and denuclearization to the Korean Peninsula. I look forward to our discussion this morning, and I thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.